What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my first impressions of Wasteland 2, an isometric CRPG from inXile Entertainment that resurrected the Wasteland series from the confines of our memories. Interestingly enough, I covered Wasteland 3 pretty extensively. The videos are a little old at this point, a couple years actually, but I covered that game quite a bit because I loved it very much. So it might surprise you to learn that I have not actually played Wasteland 2. So naturally, it's about time I get around to it, as it's one of the very few modern-day CRPGs that I have not touched yet. Though when it comes to Wasteland in general, I think the story around how we got Wasteland 2 is just as interesting as the game itself, because if you are unaware, Wasteland was Fallout before Fallout. The original Wasteland launched in 1988 and was largely a text-based adventure. However, unlike Fallout, it did not see a sequel for 26 years. In 2014, we got Wasteland 2, as it rode the Kickstarter success of a lot of CRPGs that saw a revival in the genre around that time. The Kickstarter itself was very successful, the game had a successful launch, which is of course why we got the third game, which I've already reviewed and covered. Though inXile actually went one step farther and remastered, if you will, the original Wasteland, which you receive a free copy of simply by owning Wasteland 2. So if you really want to check out that old game, it's very doable. Though even now with that remaster, if you will, it's still pretty clunky, frankly. But while people cashing in, so to speak, on a franchise isn't unheard of, that's not really the case here. If anything, inXile went above and beyond, carrying forward the legacy of the original Wasteland. In fact, you'll meet characters and even hear about events that happened from the previous game in Wasteland 2. All of that aside, let's actually talk first impressions. I just thought that's a cool story and I wanted to mention it here. But as I've already mentioned, Wasteland 2 is an isometric CRPG. More specifically, it's turn-based, and obviously it's post-apocalypse. We play as a desert ranger, or more aptly, a squad of desert rangers, whose job is protecting the people of Arizona so everyone can thrive and try to piece their lives back together. Now, it's interesting coming from having played Wasteland 3 first to come back and see how different things were in general. So right from character creation, you can either choose to take a default squad of 4 rangers, or you can create your own or mix and match as you see fit. But even at character creation, you're a bit more limited in what each character can be good at. Whereas even in just Wasteland 3, it's very possible to make a squad that kind of covers all of your bases. The roles in Wasteland 2 appear to be a bit more specialized, and you can't spread yourself quite as thin, which I imagine is why people generally regard Wasteland 2 as harder. Now, here in the early game where I've played, the combat's been pretty simple, so it really hasn't come up yet, but most people consider Wasteland 2 harder than 3, which again I imagine is for this reason. Now, another one of the first things that jumps out at me in terms of impressions when I'm going through this one is the difference in the art style. While graphics obviously change and improve over the years, it's interesting to me that Wasteland 3 appears to be a bit more stylized, whereas Wasteland 2 has a much more grittier feel to it, and as such feels a bit more grounded right out of the gate than 3 does. Though obviously with this being a bit of science fiction, we're going to see synths, energy weapons, all sorts of science fiction type stuff. So I imagine we'll get to the crazier parts, but just the introduction to the game is a lot more grounded. Another thing I wanted to mention is that the combat, at least at the beginning here, is a bit on the basic side. It's pretty standard turn-based CRPG combat. You have different weapons, you can swap between them. You can use precise strike, which is like aimed shot that lets you target body parts. There's a cover system, a percent chance to hit system based on things like line of sight, cover, etc. Just kind of the standard moving parts. Now, in general, the games that kind of rode that initial Kickstarter wave in the early 2010s in terms of CRPGs didn't quite flesh out the combat as much as a lot of the later entries more recently have. Though with this game's reputation for being a bit more difficult, I'm very curious to see how difficult the combat actually gets as we go forward, because at least in the introduction to the game, the first few areas, the combat seems pretty basic as far as these games go. So I'm curious if once more options start showing up, that type of stuff. If anything about it really stands out from the crowd. But to give kind of a general overview, my first impressions of Wasteland 2 are very solid. The game seems to put a lot of emphasis on choice and letting you explore and kind of roleplay your character, giving you a variety of means from character creation to your build or play style to do that with, and even choices that get made in the narrative, combined with that sort of gritty post-apocalypse feel and solid CRPG combat. And naturally, you have something that someone like myself, who runs a channel covering CRPGs, enjoys quite a bit. So no real surprises there, but Wasteland 2 does have a lot of really cool things going on, and I'm excited to dive into it, learn the systems more in and out, see where the story goes, at least in terms of choices, that kind of thing. Obviously, I've played 3, I know how the story ends. But as I move to review the title, most of what I'm looking at is just how deep some of these systems in this initial outing go. But that's all I've got for you guys today. Certainly hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. I'm not sure exactly how long reviewing this one will take me. There's quite a bit going on in November, some of which I am currently working on. So it might be a few weeks before you actually see the review for this one, but I'm excited to finally get to playing it. Now, regardless of all that though, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.